We all know that water in Minecraft is strange. But when I say strange, I don't mean the normal things, like it makes diamonds instead of circles, or it doesn't spread if an edge is close enough. You can't push or pull waterlogged blocks, except when you can. I don't mean creating strange flow behaviors with nearby water, but I do mean a little bit of this though. I don't mean floating iron on it, but sinking a feather. I don't mean using pistons to create floating sections of water, or even creating an infinite amount of it. When I say strange, I mean this. Here is a block of falling water, an enderman holding water, and a display entity of water. If you've never seen this before, it's because you can't actually do any of these, which always bothered me until I learned the reason. Minecraft water doesn't have a model. Dealing with waters in games is hard, and it really depends on what you're trying to do with it. Most modern games will deform a mesh on the surface, play some animated texture, and maybe have some particles, or maybe just try to keep the player out of it. Voxel games have it particularly hard because you are dealing with volumes. If you remove a volume of water, you expect it to respond somehow. Ideally, the liquid would level out, and that adds a lot of complexity. The larger the volume, the harder this gets. I'm not going to go into all these complexities because that's a different video, but we are going to talk about why you can't get Minecraft water to render in any other way except as blocks in the world. I often use display entities in my videos, and I was a bit sad when I found out that water doesn't render. The same with those earlier cases. You can summon a falling block of water, but it's invisible until it lands. I thought maybe this was due to transparency or maybe the animation, but Fire has both these properties, and they work just fine. Or maybe you had to define the specific state of water, and the default doesn't work, but no, that doesn't work either. We now have access to adding custom models into the game with a resource pack, like I've been doing on the Geologic Timeline project. This is a piece of flint, but it uses this other model. So I was a bit surprised when I checked to see if I could make my own water model, and it worked just fine. In the opening, I was being a bit glib when I said there isn't a model for water. If you open the assets, there is a JSON file for water in the model directory. But if you open it, the only thing there is the texture to use for particles. For comparison, a normal model will have some static vertices, faces, and define the textures to use. So let's talk a bit about Minecraft models and graphics in general. You can roughly break everything in the game into one of three things. There are blocks, entities, and particles. Blocks seem to be the most simple. They are aligned to the grid, and you can only have one per coordinate. But everything is not as it seems. Something like an item frame is actually an entity. You can turn on hitboxes and see its shape. This lets you place multiple frames in a single coordinate, and a player can interact with each of them. There are also blocks that are categorized as block entities, which aren't entities like the item frames. These are blocks that contain data in them that aren't just block states, but these don't all behave the same either. It's pretty common knowledge that some of these will disappear if you get about 64 blocks away, and this is independent of your render settings. This is relevant to water, I promise. The game renders everything as chunks, not as blocks like you might think. A chunk is 16 by 16 blocks, and then there is a subchunk, which is 16 by 16 by 16. When rendering, the game looks at all the blocks in the subchunk, gets their positions and block states, looks at the game models for each block to know where to place each vertex and what textures go where, and builds a mesh from these vertices. My example here has visible textures on the outside, but when it's actually in place, parts that aren't visible are not generated. We can hop over to another world with just one chunk and use a mod to actually look at the wireframe mesh. Even though each subchunk is its own mesh, it still uses each block face as its own plane. I'm not a VFX guy or even a computer science guy, so forgive me if I get some specifics wrong, but if you had a cube of 2x2 blocks, Minecraft currently uses 8 polygons for a face. I was a bit surprised that Minecraft doesn't do some sort of greedy mesh where it condenses the faces into a lower number of polygons. You could have this exact same mesh with just 2 polygons. Since this needs to be generated on the fly, maybe the time it would take to calculate the lower poly mesh would be too expensive for the performance gain. I would actually love to hear it if anybody knows. Let's get back to the other world. So when you are in a game, the subchunk you are in is basically one mesh. mostly. When you are looking at a block and see that outline, it's not actually highlighting that block. The game is just putting a transparent cube aligned to the grid where you are looking at. When you interact with the block, the game rebuilds that chunk mesh and displays the new one. This chunk mesh is a problem for some blocks like chest, which have an animated model. And I mean animated model, not just animated texture. These animated blocks are handled differently and are not part of the main mesh. They are their own individual mesh being displayed. So if you have one sub-chunk of stone, it's one mesh being displayed. But if you have one sub-chunk of chest, you have 4,096 meshes, which can impact performance, and this is probably why they are cold at a shorter distance. There is also the issue of Mojang not being entirely consistent with how they do things. Some items like beds don't have animated models, but still get cold, and I'm not sure why. Copper golems also get cold, but that's because they don't have a block model. Even in statue form, they use the entity model, so it uses a different renderer. My point is that Minecraft handles blocks in many different ways, and water is separate from block entities or regular blocks. Most blocks that have multiple states or positions, like stairs, do this through block states. You can see these properties in the F3 menu, and there is actually a debug world where you can see every possible block state of every block. Here are some stairs and all of their permutations, but if we look at water, there are many waterlogged items, but only a few for plain water. Water does have block states, but they are only for the level of the water. And even though you can set water levels to 0 to 15, there is really only 8 levels. This is because, similar to the maps, they're using some bitwise logic here and have one value for the water level and if the block is falling. Starting with 0 is a full block, and then counting up lowers the water level. So I think it's subtracting the values from 8. If it's 8 or higher, it becomes falling water, and higher values up to 15 don't change anything as far as I can tell. Another oddity is that the name of all water other than source blocks is flowing water. Usually that's the name of what you would use to set blocks with, but it's different here. And I'm not sure if any other blocks do that. Anyway, so if they only have these 9 block states, how do we get all of these other shapes? Observers work by detecting changes in block or block state. So if we have it watch some flowing water and then remove the source, it triggers on every level drop. If we go over here and have it observe some flowing water, then put some waterlogged blocks near it, it sees no change. Even though the water is changing visually, it is still level 4 flowing water. This change in water is not a block state, and the water needing to change in response to the surrounding blocks is the reason why water doesn't have a model. All of this is the same for lava, by the way. And oddly enough, even though Minecraft is known for everything being squares, water and lava is, I think, the only surface that uses singular triangles to make a face instead of pairs to make squares. If you did all of this with block states and models, you would need thousands to cover every possibility. Instead, Minecraft uses tessellation and generates the mesh at runtime. We had flowing water in the game briefly before tessellation, back in InDev 2010-615, which caused the water to render as its level without trying to smooth everything. Interestingly, this is how Hytale does water right now. If you place down a water source, you get all of these steps. Here is the code for the Minecraft liquid mesh construction, and there is a section here where each block checks its neighbors and then returns the average height. There are some modifiers for nudging the average lower if the surrounding blocks are air, and that's how you can get water levels like this, even though both of these are water level 7. Or if you put 2 next to each other, they rise up where they touch. A graphical recreation would look a little bit like this. The game knows there are liquid blocks here and what levels they are. We can draw a temporary mesh to look at, but it would actually just be points in the code. The levels have base heights and it's modified by the surrounding blocks. If a neighboring block is air, it reduces that height a little bit. These blocks are also sitting on solid blocks, so the bottom face isn't needed. The next block is touching a full block, so it matches that height, but averages on the other side. It also removes the touching faces. This edge actually needs to be the other way around to make the triangles work. It's touching a full waterlogged block, so the corner height is set to full. The next one's back doesn't need to be rendered, so it's removed. And it's touching a waterlogged block, so that side is set to full. And the last one just slopes down. Once this mesh is made, it adds it onto the chunk mesh of other blocks, and we see the finished product. So in short, there is no model. There is only instructions for building a mesh. So when you try and do something like have an Enderman hold water, the game looks for the model, but there just isn't anything there. I was curious if I changed the model to actually have vertices and textures, would the game be able to use it for these cases? But sadly, no. So who cares about this, and why does it matter to anyone besides me? Well, there has been multiple bug reports put in on this, and Mojang has closed them saying that things are working as intended because, well, they are. To me, it seems like there could be an easy fix where you can just have a special water and lava model that are used for these weird cases, but the use case needing that is pretty niche. In regular gameplay, you can't get falling blocks of water, Endermen don't pick up water, and canonically it would hurt them anyway. If you wanted to make a display entity, you could add one with a resource pack and a custom model, but you would need to make a model for every water level you needed. I'm accomplishing what I'm doing with a mod made by my friend Gamma. It fixes many of these issues that I brought up, but if you wanted to make any non-flat shapes, that would need many models, and making triangles in Minecraft will have to be a different episode, because that's the end of this one. Thanks again to Gamma, and I also want to thank Ofek, who made the wireframe mod, and Curious for helping me with some resource pack elements. Both the mods are linked in the description. And if you made it this far into the video, I hope you liked it. This is just something that I thought was interesting, and I thought others might like it too. I don't talk much about my channel, and the last time was a year ago when I got 100k subs, and now I'm over 256. I also don't self-promote much, and I'm not really interested in doing sponsored videos, but if you are interested in supporting me directly, there is a Patreon. And lastly, I know people are waiting for part 2 of the Vintage Story review, and I can say that the script is complete. This video was my break from working on it, and I'll be recording and editing that next. So until then, have a nice day, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.